What's happening, Hardscapers? Today we're going to be talking about owning versus renting, my thoughts on the topic, and this is a very opinionated piece. It all depends about you, your personal risk tolerance, as well as many other factors to make sure that the numbers make sense. Leave your comments in the comment section below about your thoughts about owning versus renting. When do you do it in your business, and what you agree or disagree on that I talked about in this video. Let's get into this. So personally, my thoughts on owning versus renting equipment are that the numbers really just need to make sense at the end of the day. And even if they do start to make sense or to get to a point where it does make sense, you still need to weigh your own personal risk tolerance on purchasing a piece of equipment in your business, understanding that there is a risk factor to purchasing a piece of equipment, especially if the numbers don't quite make sense at this current point in time in your business, but also understanding that there's a risk factor to not purchase a piece of equipment, especially if the numbers do make sense. However, everybody's going to have their own risk tolerance to doing this and do decide on owning a piece of equipment versus renting a piece of equipment. And beyond the numbers, personal factors also play a role into this. For example, if you're married, especially if you have kids, there's more factors to weigh into your decisions on these types of things. Even if you are the only one in your business from your family, it's still a family business. So you do need to factor in your family's risk tolerances, your family's decisions, and that's incredibly important for you and your business. That communication with your family is a major factor as you progress in your business. So starting with knowing your numbers, this begins at the beginning of every season with creating a budget, your goals for that season, even a couple of seasons or 3 seasons down the road. What are your goals that you want to accomplish in your business, and how are you going to save towards those goals? In my business, I have a budget where I'm accumulating money to purchase equipment in my business years before I go ahead and purchase that piece of equipment. That way, I'm already charging for that piece of equipment and I'm already accumulating that money in a separate account for those equipment purchases when I'm ready to pull the trigger on them. I can't stress this enough. Knowing your numbers begins with that budget at the beginning of the season, identifying where your business is going and setting goals in your business in order to achieve those goals through that budget, because that budget allows you to create estimates and quotes from to ensure that you're recouping these overhead expenses, these equipment costs, these labor expenses and material costs, and earning a profit all on top of that. So if you aren't already creating a budget for your business, there's a link in the description below to our spreadsheet that helps you budget and estimate from that budget to ensure that you're recouping these costs, to ensure that you're knowing your numbers. There's also a course that goes along with that to help you ensure that you are doing it properly. So the link is in the description below for that. But once you've got that budget set, you can start to understand your numbers a little bit further. And when it comes to owning versus renting a piece of equipment, you can run those numbers to ensure that that ownership of that equipment makes sense as opposed to renting it. The easy formula for this would be to calculate the ownership of that piece of equipment, how many years you're going to use that piece of equipment for, and then minus the resale value after that many years of ownership with that. You can actually calculate this yourself fairly easily by looking online and seeing just the market value of these pieces of equipment before you go ahead and purchase them, and calculating how much they're worth after a certain amount of years having used them. So with this, you would take that initial value of the purchase minus the resale value and then divide it by the number of years of use you think you'll get out of it. This will give you the yearly cost for that piece of equipment. And this is what you're going to use to compare it to the rental value in a given season for that piece of equipment. If it's a piece of equipment that you think you'd use every single day on a project, you would then reach out to a rental company and see what it would cost you to rent that piece of equipment for that year and compare those two prices. That's fairly straightforward, but that's not always going to be the case. When it comes to renting versus owning, you're likely deciding on a piece of equipment that you're not using every single day. You're trying to crunch those numbers and see if it works for you. So with this, you can look at the previous year's numbers in your business to decide how many times did I rent this piece of equipment? How much did it cost me? And is it looking like that's going to be the same this year? Or is it going to go up or down depending on the types of projects that you're actually taking on in your business? This is where knowing your numbers and keeping data from previous years really helps you make informed decisions in your business, and where it becomes extremely crucial as your business grows. So with that information, you can compare the cost of ownership per season to how much you spent last year in a season for that piece of equipment, and whether or not that is going to go up or down, and compare those two numbers to make an informed decision. If you don't have those numbers, you can then calculate how many days a week you think you'll use that piece of equipment, contact a rental dealership, see how much that costs to rent that piece of equipment per day, per week, per month, whatever you think it might be in your business, and then compare those two numbers. With that, that's a fairly easy calculation to decide whether or not owning versus renting is for you. Now, on top of that, you need to also consider other things with your ownership. For example, insurance plays a major role with the cost of that ownership, something that rentals may not have because it's already priced into that rental. So talk to your rental company about that. Another cost would be the cost of storage if you own that piece of equipment, if you don't already have storage, especially with transportation like a trailer, if you don't already have a trailer to transport that piece of equipment. With rentals, you don't have to worry about that storage, and you can actually have that piece of equipment dropped off, delivered to your job site, and then picked up when you're all done. Other things like maintenance really catches up to you, especially in those later years of that equipment's life. A lot of times I hear from business owners that say that they'll really start to make money once their equipment is paid off, but that's just not the case. You still need to charge like you're making payments on that piece of equipment, because as that piece of equipment gets older, those payments will eventually become zero, but maintenance is only going to go up over time, and you need to factor that in, as well as when that piece of equipment needs to be replaced. You want to already have that money available to you to be able to replace that piece of equipment. Otherwise, it's coming directly out of your profit, or even worse, out of your salary as the owner. So definitely calculate maintenance over time, what that's going to cost you, replacing parts on the piece of equipment. Downtime is a major thing on a piece of equipment, especially as it gets older. How much is it going to cost you to then have to rent a piece of equipment to have it ready during those downtimes of that piece of equipment that you own? So as you see, it gets a little bit more complicated than just comparing a simple ownership number versus rental number for the season, and all of these things need to be factored in to your decision. You want to make sure that you have enough work lined up for that piece of equipment to make sure that it makes financial sense to carry through with that piece of equipment. And then other personal decisions need to be made. For example, your risk tolerance, your family's risk tolerance with a piece of equipment or owning a piece of equipment. Are they okay with that? There's tax advantages that come with renting versus owning. Rentals comes out in the job cost, so it's immediately deducted from the revenue of that project. Whereas with ownership, it is a depreciating asset. So you may want to discuss this with an accountant to see whether or not it's the right move for you. So as you can see, it does get a little bit more and more complicated when deciding whether or not ownership versus rental is for you. In my business, as we transfer away from being a simple lift and relay business where it's very labor heavy, less equipment heavy, and get into the more design build space, we see that it gets more and more likely that we are going to pull the trigger and purchase pieces of equipment in my business as the numbers make more and more sense. But at the same time, I needed to make sense for my family, and they need to come in on this decision with me. This is where personal and business decisions get collided, and a business, no matter what, is a family business, even though I'm the only one in my family operating it on the day-to-day basis. Like I said, I'd love to know your thoughts and feelings about this ownership versus renting. What did you agree with? What did you disagree with that I talked about in this video? Leave it in the comment section below. As I said, we've got a budget and estimate spreadsheet. The link is in the description below as well, where you'll be able to create your budget for the season and estimate from that budget to ensure that you're recouping all of your costs in that season for every estimate that's going out the door. This also has a rental versus ownership calculator in there to help you make those decisions, to ensure that you're knowing your numbers prior to making that decision to own a piece of equipment. If you want more content on knowing your numbers, there's also links in the description to articles on howtohardscape.com that helps you with these decisions, as well as our membership-only platform that has courses on knowing your numbers that are coming up in the near future. So be sure to check out that link in the description. And if you're not already overwhelmed enough with all these resources, we've also got the How to Hardscape podcast, where we interview industry-leading experts on knowing your numbers, on estimating, and so much more. So lots of free episodes on the podcast. Like this video if you found it at all helpful for whatever reason. That really helps me and to grow this channel to bring you more hardscaping content. And subscribe to this YouTube channel for more hardscaping content. Thank you so much for watching.